China-Angola relationship, that the guy who's managing Luanda is their top most intelligence dude, and that person is the guy who entrusts. So it's a relationship of the highest strategic order for both countries. For China, that was embarking on this great path of economic cooperation with Africa, and for Angola, how can we maximize the value? So it was a real thing. It was ambitious. It was huge. Angola rapidly became the main supplier of oil to China, which at that stage was third biggest economy in the world. Angola was ahead of Saudi Arabia as an oil supplier for China. So that's how important it was. It was hugely strategic, and you've got to think China is growing in the noughties, so to speak, and an average of 8, 9, 10% growth. The oil that you need to do that from a standing start, is pretty amazing. And so that gives you a sense of just how important that relationship was on the Chinese side as well. It really was a sort of a mutual benefit thing in terms of the two regimes.
Let's jump now to the Portuguese angle, which you have covered so interestingly in this great investigation, which I should say is in the Africa Report issue, July-September issue, which is out now at all good retailers. But I just want to read this passage because I enjoyed it. Lisbon's tree-lined Avenida da Liberdade, with luxury stores such as Louis Vuitton and Prada, became a promenade for Luanda's moneyed clique. But they kept a low profile at home. A businessman splitting his time between London, Lisbon and Luanda explained the thinking. They weren't bling bling like in Russia and Nigeria. The code was, do everything you want outside, but be careful in Luanda. Let's make the money here and have fun elsewhere. What was he talking about?
Well, I think he was talking about the way things were always done, and I think I think what he's bringing to the fore there is the importance of discretion in Angola, and I think that very much we also felt that very much during this investigation, didn't we, Patrick? That it's very difficult in terms of accessing information. It's a very difficult place. That's why so many of the sources are off the record. A lot of people are very hesitant about sharing any information, even off the record, let alone on. And I think that's what he's talking about. It's if you are going to be eating your steak, as one of our sources said in Angola, make sure you've got other people eating it too, because that will keep them quiet. And don't show off. Don't show off. So I think that's really what he's talking about. So it was much easier for very wealthy Angolans to spend their time and their money elsewhere. Also, remember that Angola at the time, and I think this still rings true, there was not very much for you to spend your money on in Angola. Sure. Aside from real estate, you'd sort of quickly done the sort of, done your trip round, and there wasn't very much to buy.
But in Lisbon, all different. In Lisbon, they could party.
Look, there was stuff in Angola. There were car showrooms. There were expensive hotels. You could buy expensive meals. But really, if you had a lot of money, the question really more was about how were you going to get that money out and where could you spend it elsewhere. So part of it would have been spending it on fashionable clothes and nice days and nights out, but I think a lot of it would have also been more about buying things of value, real estate, not just in Lisbon, certainly a lot of in Brazil, in other parts of Latin America. We've heard increasingly an interest from Angolans in Asia, in Dubai, and also in Lisbon. I think the other thing that the Angolans became increasingly important in terms of the business sector. They were buying out large chunks of media groups, in part to control what was being said about them, of banks, telecommunications companies, cement companies. They were buying real estate, as I said, and all sorts of things. So obviously, because of the language and the culture and the historical links, Lisbon was the sort of first port of call, if you like. But I think it did extend very much beyond Portugal. I mean, the other thing to say about Portugal, what we heard is that people have alleged that Portuguese authorities also made arrangements for the Angolans to be able to do that. So there was some complicity from the Portuguese authorities.
You spoke to Ana Gomes, a politician in Portugal, who's very scathing about.
She's extremely scathing, very, very. I mean, it's a shame in a story like that you can only pick out a few quotes, because she's an absolutely fascinating person, and one of the few people we spoke to who was very much happy to speak on the record and be very open about her views on the relationship. And interestingly, wasn't just pointing the finger at Angola, but was very much also pointing the finger at the complicity of the authorities at home for her, which is Portugal.
Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sums up. Angolan individuals and companies own about a tenth of the Lisbon Stock Exchange, which is pretty significant.
Pretty good
one country, yeah, a tenth. It's bigger than the US. US companies and individuals have got in Portugal. So it's a significant amount of money. We travelled down the coast a bit to a place called Cascais. I know, really good pronunciation that. There is this sort of marvellous Lego building on the coast, and this Cascais place is like, I don't know what you'd call it. It's not quite Saint-Tropez. So it's like it's a posh seaside town, and they own a lot of real estate there. I mean, there was one building. It's called the Angolan Building, isn't it? And
I think some people call it that.
Yeah, they call it. It's called. Yeah, some people, locals call it
Residencia de Estoril or something.
I mean, most of the apartments are owned by one or two Angolans. I mean, it's brought it up. So it's you do get a sense of a real commercial presence in Lisbon and surrounding towns. Copelipa himself was reporting in a Portuguese newspaper, much to his annoyance, to have bought a couple of port wine farms. And the journalist was outraged that he did it all by mail order. He just said, how many tens of millions of euro do you want for this property? And they said, it'll be to you, General, it'll be a mere 50 million or whatever it was. He said, okay, I'll take two. And they thought, that's just sort of so extravagant. They couldn't believe it, that you can buy a whole wine farm by telephone. He hadn't even seen it, So you do get this sense that here these people coming strutting in. I think one other little vignette, if got a bit of time, just like at that time, Europe was in a crisis. Yeah, we had the financial crisis, 2007, 2008 financial crisis. Portugal was one of the pigs, so called. And in very bad shape economically. And that was the time when there was a kind of role reversal. There used to always be a queue of people waiting outside the Portuguese embassy in Luanda to get visas to come and work in Portugal or to get a paper sorted out, whatever. Now, it all shifted around, and outside the Angolan embassy in Lisbon, there was a queue of Portuguese people trying to get jobs in Angola. And, it was all of that era. There was a real turning of the colonial tables. Now, suddenly, this, incredibly strong, economically speaking, African country had turned the tables on the former colonial power, Portugal. And it was a big moment for Angola.
So there are these chunks of banks, real estate, various companies. What is happening to that? I mean, maybe we should wrap up on this at this point. What happens next? What are the prospects for getting back some of the things which have flowed out of the country? Is the current administration deciding, listen, we have to just have a kind of general amnesty, get back what we can, and then just move on? Or are they going to spend a long time in difficult litigation using forensic accountants to trace money flows and have a lot of drawn out legal cases? What's the thinking?
My personal view is it's very unlikely that that's going to happen. That's my personal view. We did speak to asset tracers to get a sense of how easy it would be for Angola to do that.
Were you asking for a friend? If I wanted to recoup the $200 billion.
No. We put it to asset tracers.
Yeah.
The reality is, without substantial funds, time, and most importantly, political will, it's going to be very, very, very hard for Angola to do that. We did speak to some people more recently since we published the article, who've said that Angola is thinking about getting some of that money back.
Yeah, there have certainly been talks. I mean, and I think one of the things that's informing the government's interest is the more it goes through the papers and the documents from the Dos Santos era, the more it finds, evidence of irregularities. But probably the overwhelming problem is just the lack of finance. If you look at, Angola's growth path over the next 5 years, it doesn't look great. There's a lack of investment in the oil and gas sector as well. So it's not going to be easy to recover, even if the oil price stays, reasonably high, and production has gone down. It was level pegging with Nigeria, nudging 2 million a day. It's now down to 1.4, 1.5 million a day. And it doesn't look good on present levels of investment. So they've got a real fiscal problem to deal with, a financial, economic, structural problem to deal with, diversifying the economy.
Which at the same time, Patrick, is a reason why Angola may at some point need to chase some of this money.
Definitely.
I think it's both sides of the coin, isn't it? Angola will need to be desperate enough to really be forced in a position where it has to do something, and also
to change policy and strategy. Yes. I mean, it's like a lot of these sort of mono economy situations. They've got to diversify. It's not, whether it's no longer a rhetorical point. They've got to. I mean, the advantage they've got over someone like Nigeria is that there were about 30 million Angolans.
About 25 million.
Yeah. I mean, compared to sort of 200 million Nigerians with roughly the same resource base. So they should be in a much better position to turn things around. But, I mean, one of the points that the asset tracers that Zoe and I spoke to were making, that, you only do this when you've got real political will. It's not something you just it's not a rhetorical flourish. You've really got to send your lawyers in. You've got to sit down with investigators and asset specialists in many, many jurisdictions. You could, even to identify where the money is. And so if you think you've lost $150 billion, maybe your first billion, it could take you several months to even get to the stage of, I know that billion is in the British Virgin Islands, and I know that is the trust fund that's got it. To get to that can take you months. And then to go to the authorities of the British Virgin Islands and say, we need to freeze that money, even before you can have a court case to get it unblocked, let alone sent back to you. And then these sort of annoying Western governments will tell you things like, well, we'll return your money if you can prove that it's going to be in an economically and socially productive enterprise. We're certainly not going to turn it back to your treasury.
You sound just like a government.
I used to be a government in an earlier life. And so that's the problem. They really they can do all that work, and then they've got to arrange for the reflows. So it could take, it's a project to get $1 billion back could take several years.
Abacha's money is only just dribbling back,
and that's 20 years ago. Yeah. So I mean, I sort of my hopeful self says, right, I let them do it. Well, I want them to do it, definitely. Let's get much money as back. I think the realistic view would be, it takes huge political effort and quite a bit of patience and determination to do it.
Just last words, would you, if you could, relive your days in Luanda in the early 2000s?
Would I relive them?
Is Luanda in the early 2000s a fun place to be?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Luanda in the early 2000s was a great fun place to be. I think that economic growth came with so much hope and excitement and possibility, and that's something special. And I think Angola is, I've been there a lot since I haven't been living there, and it still is a very special place, and it's certainly a place that has a lot of importance for me personally, and that I love very much. And we've spoken to people who are, as I said earlier, are quite upset with the new government, but I still want to feel hopeful, and I am still erring on the side of hope for Angola's future.
That is the last in this season of Talking Africa. We'll be back for your listening pleasure in September. Until then, come complain to us on Twitter @The Africa Report and also on our Facebook page. Do leave us some flattering comments wherever you get your podcast.